Okay, this is lecture 2, and our topic is shape. And shape, if you recall from last week or last session, is a visually perceived area that's bounded by an enclosed line. An enclosed line is a line that starts and ends at the same position, at the same location. Another way to define shape or create shape is to create something that has a change in color and therefore is different from or separated from the background. Shape, of course, is two-dimensional in nature. And when we deal with shape, we will deal with shape in terms of being outlined or filled or both. The shape has a black outline and an orange fill. We talked last time about forced edges, about line actually merging with the fill and the outline therefore disappearing. So shapes with forced edges are easily seen as three-dimensional, so they help us create the illusion of volume. A shape that is fully outlined like this is going to remain in the two-dimensional realm. There's several varieties of shapes that we will work with, and some shapes will actually cross the line from one variety to another. But we'll go ahead and define these varieties. One of them is geometric, and geometric is anything that is specifically geometrical. It's mathematically proportioned and measured out and so forth. And so anything with 90-degree angles all the way around will be a geometric shape. So as we look at this energy poster, we have a rectangle, which is a geometric shape. We have angles that are 90 degrees defining the perimeter of this piece. And then inside we see this sort of human figure, and this human figure is made up of several squares. So we have a square here, and there's one here, and another here, and another here, and another here. There's one here, and it keeps going down. And so it's a just a bunch of squares that are stacked on top of each other to create this form. This is a geometric shape, even though it's no longer specifically a square. It is made up of squares. As we look at this book cover, overall it is a rectangle, which is geometric, and there's an upper section, which is a rectangle. There's the white center section, which is a rectangle, and then there's a lower rectangle section, again another geometric shape, and of course we have the circle, which is geometric. Organic shapes are those that are representing things that actually exist, that are natural and organic, like trees and flowers and leaves and birds, or they are actually found in nature, such as the shape of an actual bird. So here we have the representation of a bird, and it's highly stylized, but it's still organic. Clouds would also fall into that understanding. And then the pelican is organic. Rectilinear shapes are not rectangles, and they're not geometric. They are straight edges, so they'll have corners, but they are not mathematically constructed. And so as we look at this logo of this wolf, we see every shape here has a straight edge. And as we look over here, obviously the yellow and the orange triangle those two shapes are both geometric, but the white shape and the blue shape are rectilinear. They are not geometrically proportioned or constructed. Curvilinear shapes have curved edges, and they can have corners, but they are known for having a curve to them. So there's a change in direction on the edges. As we look at this logo, obviously there's geometric shapes going on in here, but the two hand elements are curvilinear shapes with points and so forth. And then the talk bubble is all curvilinear. There's no straight edge on that thing at all. And the two guys from Geek and Poke are also curvilinear shapes. Irregular shapes are those that have both curved and straight edges. So if we look at the two, obviously we have a straight edge, then it curves, it straightens out, turns a corner, straightens out, straight, and then it curves, and so forth. And the same thing with the three that's kind of overlapping it. We have a curve and a straight and another curve and a straight. So this is irregular. And every shape in this rug is also curvilinear, or pardon me, irregular. There's a straight and a slight curve and more of a curve and a straight and a curve and so forth. So all of these shapes are irregular. Accidental shapes are the result of a process. So if you spill coffee, the shape that the coffee ends up in on the table or on the floor is an accidental shape. You haven't controlled it. And that's basically what an accidental shape means. So if we look at the torn paper edges, you can control approximate size and you can control direction of the tear, but you can't control how that paper is going to tear to create this accidental edge. Same thing with brush strokes. We have the top shape and a couple bottom shapes here, and they were created by the process of stroking a brush, but you can't control how the paint's going to pull off of the brush onto the surface. You can't control what the edge is going to look like, and so forth. You can control the amount of pressure, the width of the stroke, the color, the direction, the length, but you can't control the things that are not controllable. So these are accidental shapes. So, having gone through all of that, next question is, what do you see? This is a very well-known logo. It was created in the mid-20th century, and it's made up of shapes. So obviously we have a geometric shape in the inner circle, there's a geometric shape in the outer circle, and then we have a curvilinear shape. We've got 2 points, but the edges are curved. So this logo is made up of 2 geometric shapes and a curvilinear shape. On the cat poster, obviously the cat is organic. And then we have a somewhat loosely contrived rectangle. It's a rectilinear shape because some of the corners are not exact, and it also has some accidentalness to it. If you notice, there's kind of a roughened brush strokey edge. Here, this is actually a fabric. It's a textile pattern, and we see the circles and partial circles and so forth, and we also see some curvilinear shapes going on. And we also have a sense of accidentalness in terms of the edge treatments on each of these shapes. So any design can have a variety of shapes. Some shapes can be geometric in inclination, but also have different qualities of some of the other varieties. So that's something to keep in mind. The Beijing logo, the sense of the brush stroke, the uneven edge, gives this an accidental sensibility. This is accidental. These are geometric. And the 2012 London Olympics is all rectilinear. And then we have, of course, the geometric here. And as we look at this plate, what do you see? The overall shape of the plate is geometric. It's a circle. There's an inner circle, and there are stylized organic shapes all throughout. So in this motif, in this design, there's several different combinations of shapes. When we deal with shapes, we have to relate them to each other and obviously to the overall design space. But in creating shape relationships within your design, you start creating a sense of space. And you start in some ways telling a story, or you start creating pattern and things like that. So the relationship of shapes to each other becomes a very basic and very important thing to understand. So we'll just list them here. There's a detachment, there is a touching, there is an overlapping, there is an interpenetration, There's shapes that are united, shapes that subtract, shapes that intersect with each other, and then there is division. They divide. So as we look on the next slide, we have two shapes. We have a circle and a large gray shape in a rectangle. So the gray shape and the circle are detached. There is distance between. And so this is occupying a portion of the design space. This is over here. And the only relationship that they have to each other is the fact that they're in the same design space. The spatial understanding of a detached relationship like this between two shapes or more is flat. It emphasizes the two-dimensionality. When we bring the two shapes closer together, we have the gray and of course the circle, and now they're touching. It still emphasizes the flatness. It's two-dimensional. These guys can both exist on the same plane. When we overlap, this is our first understanding of spatial depth. When something is on top of another thing or is in front of another thing, then the other thing is behind it, and it indicates in our psychology, in our thinking, a spatial relationship. On top, in front of, behind, beside. All of these are spatial relationships, but there is depth, or we start having the possibility of the illusion of depth when we have something in front of something else. Interpenetration is just basically the idea of transparency. So now we have the orange circle at a state of being where we can see through it. And we still recognize the circle, of course, but we are looking through it to the black ground and the gray shape. And so that is transparency. Transparency is not necessarily a flat understanding, but it's a little bit ambivalent in terms of the spatial relationship of the shapes. Where we take the circle and join it to the larger shape, we create one new shape. This is now no longer two separate shapes, it's one new one. And this is what we call union, or the shapes are actually united. And so this is no longer two shapes, it's one shape, and it's different than either of the other two. Subtraction is where one shape takes a bite out of or deletes a portion of another shape. And in this case, we can obviously see the bite that the circle has taken out of the gray shape. So the circle has subtracted a portion of the gray shape. So if we have the circle and the gray shape and we lose everything but the piece that was subtracted, over here we now have an intersection. So basically, like if you have two streets come together at an intersection and you take everything that's within the common area of both streets going both directions and you eliminate the rest of the street, all you would have is the intersection area between, say, the crosswalks or between the four corners of the intersection of the streets. So that's what this is. It's the gray shape and the circle have now intersected, and all we have left is the intersected area. Division can happen in a variety of ways. There is a sense of, there can be a sense of transparency, let's put it that way. But transparency is a different issue. When you're dealing with transparency, the transparent shape is affected by the color that it sits on top of. So here we have the orange affected by the black, and here we have the orange affected by the gray. Here we have the orange shape and the gray shape, and now the intersected area is a different color. So this actually gives us three shapes. We have divided two shapes into three by creating that overlap. And so we have 1, 2, 3 shapes sitting on top of another shape, which is the ground. And we can do this in a different way. We see the circle, and it has a sense of overlapping the now magenta triangle, and where it overlaps is now blue. So we still have 1, 2, 3 shapes, and then the ground shape. So that's division. Both of these are two ways that you can create a sense of division. So as we're looking at this, this is a wallpaper for a computer screen, and obviously it's an older computer screen because of the aspect ratio. But if we look here, we don't really see detachment. We see some touching. We see really there's no overlapping. What we see is interpenetration or transparency. So most of the letter form shapes that we see on here are transparent, so we can see through them to other shapes, and that gives us an interesting sense of layering, a little bit of depth, and so forth. And but there's nothing that really stands out and becomes the hero except for this isolated little shape down here, which is the logo, and then it is separated from the information below it. So overall, we're looking at interpenetration, also known as penetration or transparency, and that's basically what's going on. In this image, this is a painting obviously, we have union. If you look at the slats of the fence, you don't see the individual slats. They have all joined each other into basically one new shape. And by virtue of knowing what this is supposed to be, we understand it as a picket fence, but we don't see the individual pickets. This is overlapping the house, and the house shape as a whole is overlapping the background sky. The windows and shutters appear to be overlapping the facade of the house. Obviously the flag's overlapping the roof and the facade here. The Apple badge from their website is actually using division. We have a light gray and a lighter gray, and we have a black, and where they overlap it's lighter gray. And so if we had the light gray and the darker gray overlapping and one was transparency, this would be a darker gray than this, but it's a lighter gray, so this is division. And we can recognize the Apple logo as sitting on top or overlapping the black shape, or we can see it as subtracting and being a hole or a void in that shape. That's a little bit ambiguous in understanding. Most of the time we'll take it as, well, that is a logo on somebody's shirt, and so it is overlapping rather than subtracting. As we look at this Celtic knot, we'll notice that obviously there's some geometric shape, and then the knot area itself is actually detached from the geometric shape, but there is a sense of overlapping and things going behind and coming in front and wrapping around, and this is actually curvilinear form, and but there's a lot of intertwining going on, and so we have overlapping, things going behind, things coming in front. As we look at this piece, obviously we have division, because if you take a light red and cross it over to a darker, brighter red, this is not going to be yellow. This would be a red that's darker than the pink but lighter than the full red. This is also division. The circle here is overlapping the red rectilinear shape. Now the red rectilinear shape could be underneath the black shape, or this could be a void, so this could be an instance of subtraction. This we have a sense of being overlapped. This we have a sense of being subtracted from the pink, or it's a void. And of course the yellow is overlapping the pink area as well. When you start working with Adobe Illustrator, if you're not already familiar with it, and you start working with the Pathfinder palette, which I use a lot, it's actually quite helpful for what I do, and especially designing logos, doing a lot of drawings, character design, things like that. The Pathfinder and the Align palette are things that I pretty much have open all the time when I'm working in Illustrator. But it's good to understand the issues of the Pathfinder tool, that palette, because we're talking about union, or we're talking about subtraction, or we're talking about intersection, or we're talking about division, or we're talking about overlapping. We're talking about creating transparency effects. So all of these issues are actually embodied in this palette in Illustrator. When we deal with shape, since it's a two-dimensional area, we're obviously dealing with space, and shapes and space have a strong relationship to each other. They both are related to each other, and both can be positive or negative. When we talk about space, positive space is that which is occupied, it's taken up by something. So a circle on a ground, the circle would be the area of that overall space that is being occupied. And so that is a positive shape or positive space. Negative space is that which is considered unoccupied. Generally we refer to it as white space. White space does not always need to be white, it's negative space. But so white space and negative space are basically interchangeable. If you have a positive form, you've got to have negative space. It's just kind of one requires the other. Positive space and positive shape are pretty much interchangeable understandings. Positive space is understood because it has a shape and it's different than the ground. So if we look at this overall rectangle, it is a positive shape on top of a white ground. And each one of these rectangles is a positive shape occupying positive space on negative white space. A negative shape is an area that is negative, perceived as ground, but it actually is totally enclosed. So if we look at the S, we're going to see the black S as the positive shape, and we're going to see the red area as negative, or the ground. But notice that the shape of the S, or shape of that negative area, actually has a shape. So that is a negative shape. This is negative space. It's not negative shape because it occupies the entire area of this screen, the entire design area. If we look at the very familiar FedEx logo, obviously the colored areas, the area that has the violet and the orange, those shapes are positive, that's occupied. Here we have negative space, and here we have negative space. So right in here, it's negative space. Here it's negative space, and around here and around in here. So it just, negative space actually is the ground. But we also have negative shape, and this oval inside the D, yes, it's negative space, but it has a specific boundary, and so that becomes a shape. Out here, it's just space. Here it's a shape. Here it's a shape. And notice how the designer has used the negative space between the E and the X, and this is intentional. The negative space creates the arrow. A lot of people don't see it. If you've never seen it before, there it is. If you have seen it before, you've noticed it before, you can go, oh yeah, I remember that. But this is a very clever use of negative shape. So we look at this photograph and we notice the prospect out the windows. Each one of those window panes can be considered negative shape. They're all, if you were facing them straight on, they'd all be geometric rectangles, but right now they're basically rectilinear because of the perspective angles and so forth. But there's a frame around the entire, each entire pane, so it becomes negative shape. When we deal with negative and positive, we start having the understanding of figure and ground. Figure is the recognition of a form as opposed to the surrounding area around it. So figure and ground relationship is important for anything that we design. We can't see something unless it stands out from the background. And if there's nothing on the ground, it's just ground, there's no figure. So figure ground becomes a very important understanding throughout all design disciplines. Figure ground relationship is basically the idea of there's an object that we're looking at and there's a background. And so we take the photograph, I think this is of one of the Hines brothers, and the figure obviously is the figure including the hat and the tie and everything. And the ground is the gray area. And we've taken this and simply translated it into two basic shapes within the frame of reference. We have the black shape, which is the figure, and the gray shape is recognized as the background. We automatically perceive and look for figure-ground relationships. Figure always sits in front of or on top of ground, and therefore there's an overlap sense at least, and therefore there's a spatial relationship. Something's in front of or on top of something else. And the figure-ground understanding helps us understand what we're looking at, to comprehend things. Ground in any design is going to have its own shape, because the design structure, the frame of reference, is going to have a shape. So if we just take the black ground here, it has a shape that we can pretty much define. And obviously the figure here has a shape, and the sidewalk has a shape, and even the ivy has its own shape. If we're looking at the dad and the boy fishing on the Mississippi River, we have the overall shape of the design area. We have the organic shapes of the human forms. We have the ground, literally, which is in front of the water, which is in front of the other bank on the levee, and all of this is in front of the sky. The clouds actually are a figure-ground relationship with the sky in and of itself. If we're looking at this figure, we're not seeing this whole thing as ground. We're looking at this as figure and everything else around it is ground. Or we're looking at the boy or the boy and the man together and everything else is ground. If we're looking at the two figures combined with the bank that they're standing on as figure, everything else becomes ground. So we can only take hold of one figure-ground relationship at a time. And so if I'm looking at something right in front of me, like I'm looking at my pen, my stylus for my tablet on the computer, so I can, do this. If I'm looking at the pen, everything else becomes the ground, including the tablet. If I'm looking at the tablet, then the desktop, the top of my desk that the tablet's sitting on, is now the ground. So we perceive one figure-ground relationship at a time. And we can flip-flop or change what we consider figure and ground. And so that leads to some interesting possibilities. Figure and ground indicate a separation of one from the other. We talked in the first session about lost and found contour, where we have found or easily recognized contour or explicit edge. We have a really strong figure-ground recognition. Where figure sort of blends with the background and we kind of lose edges, the ability to distinguish the figure from the ground becomes much more difficult. So if we're looking at the poster of Louis Armstrong and we look at all of him as figure, and there's a lot of complexity within that silhouette, then the light area here and the gray here and even the ground plane becomes ground. Even what he's sitting on becomes ground. But there's an explicit understanding. We can actually take a pair of scissors or an X-Acto blade and just zip him out. and leave the ground pieces there. When we look at the portrait of Kathy Kollwitz, whose drawing we looked at in the first session, we notice that we can see her face and the edge of her cheek and into the jaw and into the chin very specifically distinguished from the background. But if we, as our eye moves around, and we kind of lose the hair and the back of the head into the ground, we don't recognize the difference in edge, so we have a lost contour. We pick up contour here a little bit, but then we lose it again right here, and we lose it here, and then we pick it up in the hand. So we have lost and found contour. So here the figure and the ground are actually blending visually. And here figure and ground are blending visually. So we can't see the edge. Notice how the lightness of the face against the darkness of the background makes the edge really clear and come forward, and that's very easy to see. That's a very strong explicit line or explicit edge. Here there is not that much light-dark difference between her shoulder and the background right there. So it doesn't read as quickly. It takes us a few moments longer to understand that's her shoulder, and we lose the wrist altogether, and we automatically fill it in our mind. So we're kind of connecting the dots in terms of the lost contour that's going on in this photograph. The more light-dark difference or contrast that figure has from ground, the more different they are in terms of lightness and darkness, the more easy they are perceived. And where there is less difference between light and dark, between figure and ground, it's harder to perceive. So we're looking at a textile design, and obviously the black forms are very easy to see against the white. The yellow, green, and the blue forms are a lot lighter than the black. They're very close in lightness to the white, and so they don't pop off the surface as quickly. And so we have the black, if we're regarding the black figure, the blue and the yellow, green, and the white become ground. If we're looking at the yellow, green, we're actually joining that and the blue with the black, so the white's ground, but everything else that has chroma or a higher, a lot more darkness, a higher degree of value, then becomes figure. So again, that one figure-ground relationship at a time. But notice how quickly we recognize the black forms against the white, and it takes a little bit longer to recognize the lighter forms, the blue and the yellow-green. But these are what helps create a sense of spatial layering or depth. We have the overlapping of the shapes, of course, and these two shapes are touching, so these two could be on the same plane. Both the blue and the green are the same degree of lightness, and that lightness is slightly lighter than the white ground, and therefore they will sit behind visually, not just by virtue of the fact that they're overlapped by the black, but because they're a lot closer in idea to the white ground. So they will automatically be further away and more close to the ground than they will be to the foreground plane of the design. So we see a sense of layering. We have an Alphonse Mucha, and we have the color version, and then it's been translated into a grayscale version. And a couple things to notice. Here, obviously, we can see the woman's hair very easily against the kind of blue-gray motif behind it. When we get over here to the gray, we notice that some of these shapes start to merge. And it's very difficult to pick out what is the hair and what is the motif behind it, because they're the same degree of darkness. So this is to point out that changes in chroma or changes in color do not help us recognize figure and ground. It's the change in lightness and darkness. So if two different colors are the same value or the same degree of lightness or the same degree of darkness, we are not going to be able to separate them very quickly. We will go with the high contrast separation first. And so we lose her hair, and especially if you squint, all of her hair just kind of disappears into the circular motif in the background here. So we see form because of changes in light and dark, not because of changes in color. Figure ground helps us set up spatial planes. This is a upholstery design, and the white forms are figure against a striped ground in the background. The white forms, since they overlap and cut across the edges of those stripes, they are visually sitting in front of the stripes. So we have a sense of foreground plane, which is almost white, kind of a creamy color, and a background plane behind it, which contains all the striped motif. So we look at Rembrandt. We have obviously the figure of the trees in the foreground. It is overlapping the midground area and the kind of hedge and the little hill and the other trees behind it, and then that's overlapping the further little cliff over here, and all of this is overlapping the ground of the sky. Notice though how, because of light-dark contrast, he focuses our eye in on not the foreground but approaching the middle ground. So we see the figure here in the middle ground, and he's further away from us than the tree is. He's on a spatial plane that's further back in space. And notice the lightness here, our eye, this is becoming the focal point, and it's not the foreground tree. We're looking beyond the tree into this area. So figure-ground relationships, the overlapping, the leapfrogging, the layering of figure-ground will help us establish volumetric illusion, and that is called planar recession. So what we have here is the tree in a foreground plane, the two figures a little bit behind it. We have the hedgerow and the trees further behind that. We've got this little cliff further behind that, another plane, and then we have the plane of the sky. Or if you will, we've got the clouds, which are closer than the vastness of the sky. So there's a lot of spatial planes going on in this painting. As we look at this photograph, we notice obviously that there are overlaps. We have this tree being overlapped by the fence, and the fence being overlapped by the tree, and the tree being overlapped by the fence. And then we recognize the type is sitting on top of everything, and the type is actually part of the design area. So what we have going on in here is a sense of depth and planar layering, so a foreground plane, a middle ground plane, a background plane, and we also have a sense of depth because of the line of the fence. It's smaller back there, it's larger here, so we get the angle and the perspective understanding. But notice what's happening in the bottom half of the image. We have this kind of fence railing which appears to be in front of the tree, but here it's starting to blend with the grass. This is, by the way, a photoshopped thing, and so this is a composited image. And we have a blending, we basically lose an overlap sensibility. Here we get the overlap and it totally flattens out here and goes into a striped pattern. But all of the bottom half is definitely giving us a sense of overlapping the top half of the image. So it's an interesting trick that this is doing, playing around with understanding of space. So figure ground perceptions can happen in a variety of ways. So as we look at the letter Q, obviously there's a real strong separation of the black Q shape against the white negative space. So the Q is positive, then we have negative white space, and the void in the Q, the negative shape, corresponds to the whiteness of the negative space around, so that we will actually recognize this as a void and not as a shape overlapping the Q shape. Put this on an orange ground, it's not as clear. It takes us a split second longer to grasp what this is, because the yellow-orange is darker than the white, and so there's less difference between light and dark on the yellow-orange and the black Q. When we take that Q shape and make it the same value or the same degree of darkness as the yellow-orange, it becomes much harder to distinguish. Here we have outlined it. Here we've outlined it more with a thicker outline, so there's a stronger recognition of the figure. We still get the sense in both of these that this is negative space or negative shape. Here we have outlined and filled. This, and this are each really emphasizing the two-dimensionality. Here we're still reading the white as figure and the yellow-orange as ground. When we get here, we've actually enlarged the Q, and now the Q is breaking the boundary of the design area. And what's really happening is that we have one shape, two shapes, and three shapes, but because of what this is, we're still reading this as a Q because we are reading it with meaning. It is a Q. It's one of those funky letters in the alphabet, and it's one of those 10 pointers in Scrabble. When we start manipulating those yellow-orange shapes and moving them around, we lose the Q-ness, and now what here has been negative shape or negative space now becomes positive shape against a white ground. With figure ground, there is a response or a psychology. Figure ground relationships do affect us. And so when we recognize what is figure and what is ground, and we can do that easily and quickly, it becomes very stable. And so the square surrounded by the gray, we understand this is figure and this is ground. We're happy, we're comfortable, we get it, okay. That's a stable figure-ground relationship. We can switch off and make a figure-ground relationship reversible, such as in the striped pattern. This can be read either as black stripes on a white ground or white stripes on a black ground. We will read it one way or the other, but not both at the same time. We can flip-flop. Either way we're comfortable, because whichever way we're looking at it, we're still looking at a figure-ground relationship, but it's just reversing. When we get to a figure-ground ambiguity, that's where it becomes more psychologically unsettling. We automatically look for figure-ground relationships. In order to notice anything, we have to focus on it, and we basically have to tune out the background. And this all happens in a split second, and we don't even think about it, we just automatically do it. When figure and ground cannot easily be distinguished from each other, we have figure-ground ambiguity. It's not a reversal. We're not seeing one figure-ground relationship, then we can, switch off and see the other. We don't know what is figure and what is ground, and that can be, in a lot of ways, unsettling. It can also be something that we can use in design to become a background for something else. Think about it. If you walk into a room that's wallpapered, you're not going to be focusing on the wallpaper. You might notice it at first, but then it should become a background supporting role to everything else in the room. If the wallpaper is the first thing you notice when you walk into a room and it's the first thing you keep noticing, there's something wrong with the wallpaper, because that's not its role. Its role is not to be the main focus of the room. It's usually to add texture, it's usually to add, ambiance or whatever. But wallpaper eventually always becomes ground. If it's fighting to be figure, then you've got trouble. Figure ground reversals are used in trompe-l'oeil and fooling the eye and visual puns quite a bit. So here we can see a white goblet with a really funky kind of base, or we can see two people talking to each other. The figures are black, there's two facial profiles, and then the ground is white. And if we see the goblet, we aren't seeing the faces. They'll become negative space. If we're looking at the faces, they become figure or positive space, and the goblet becomes ground. So hopefully you can see that. Escher was a artist that dealt a lot with figure ground reversals and played around with things and did things in a very intelligent manner. Obviously we have white ground and we have a black ground, and here we have birds, black birds, and they're kind of flying together, and all of a sudden we start seeing the gestural lines coming in, starting to form fish, and the more contour lines and the detailing, and now we've got white fish on a black ground. And how did that happen? There's a nice transition in there. If we look at the Kandinsky, we've got two wrestlers, one is white, one is black. The white wrestler's on a black ground, the black wrestler's on a white ground. That's a reversal. If we look at the white wrestler, the black one becomes the ground. If we look at the black one, the white one becomes ground. And another Escher with fish and birds. Figure ground reversal versus figure ground ambiguity. The white shape is the reversal and the flip of this shape. This shape is the reversal and the flip of this shape. This shape is the reversal and the flip of this. And so we'll see black shapes on white ground, or we'll see white shapes on black ground. One or the other, but not both at the same time. Each of these four panels is ambiguous. And in each, it is very difficult to distinguish figure from ground. And some things look like figure, but then they become ground when compared to other things. In both instances, it emphasizes two-dimensionality. So when you have a reversal of figure and ground, or you have total ambiguity where you can't really pick out one from the other, one looks like one and one looks like the other somehow, then the space is emphasized in the two-dimensional understanding. We will not have the illusion of volume when you have ambiguity or a reversal going on. We just saw this before, but we've added one more element to the team, and that is the first one on the left. Obviously, we have a red S, or pardon me, a black S on a red ground. And so the S is the figure, the red is the ground. Very easily understood. Number two, here, we still see the black S on a red ground, but now there's a framing concept going on because there's a black outline. But it's still a black S on a red ground. The red is still ground, the black is still figure. If we take each one of these red shapes and move them over here, we're now looking at these red shapes as figure on a black ground. And it's easy to see the red shapes are kind of grouped together, and there's a surround all the way through of the black ground. So figure versus ground. As we move over here, we are now compelled to see this again as a black figure on a red ground because of the relationship of the shapes. And everything that's red here is the same shapes that are here and the same shapes that are here. So we're still looking for figure ground, and we found it, and so we're okay. And this is also figure. When we get here, a different arrangement of those red shapes in the same space but because there is equal amounts of black and equal amounts of red, and they're hitting the edges and they're interacting and intertwining with each other, we have ambiguity. It's an interesting design. It is you cannot determine what is figure and what is ground in this design. If we look at the Vasarely, there's a sense of squares and circles, and again, what is figure and what is ground. We have a sense of some things being behind, some things coming forward, but are the squares figure? Are the smaller squares or the circles within them ground? Or are they figure? Is that negative space? Is that positive space? And so forth. So where things are ambiguous, we emphasize the surface pattern and the two-dimensionality. Your most basic reversal or ambiguity would be a checkerboard. Even just having two of the unit forms, two of the modules, the red and the black. Which one is the figure and which one is the ground? And as you look at this whole thing, which one is figure, which one is ground? Is it red or black? Can't tell. And the thing about that is, it's okay. These are two different designs that are variations of each other. If we look at figure in one, it becomes ground in the other just by how color and treatment, detailing is applied. And so we can take the same design, and by playing around with what becomes figure and what becomes ground, we can make a variety of variations on that design and have completely different designs, but they're all related. So that's what's going on here. If you notice, everything that's black is we're automatically reading as ground, and the white's being read as figure. Over here, we are reading, again, the white as figure against a black ground. We find figure-ground reversal a lot in contemporary design, and we see it a lot in the graphic realm. And if we look at the logo design over here, we do see the letter forms D and M, but notice how the gardening trowel is the negative space in each. This is a logo for a landscape designer. So it's a clever visual pun, and it fits the landscape designer whose initials are D and M. And if you're looking at this, the positive shapes are black against white ground, but it's the white ground that's giving us the meaning. The word tie should be read in the negative, not shape, but space. These are negative spaces. There's positive shape. There's 4 of them. But if you see what's going on, the negative space is creating a T, I, and an E. If we look at this, this is an illustration, and if you can read it, you get the point very quickly. It is basically representing what it says. So if you can read the word optical, and then in the negative space, which is also the scene, the word illusion, you're doing well. But you'll see optical and read the landscape as negative space or ground, or you're going to read the word illusion in the with the image kind of through it, and then the word optical becomes ground, and that's helped by the overall framework of the entire piece. So again, another visual pun using figure-ground reversal. Figure-ground ambiguity is used in a very practical sense for a lot of really good reasons. One of the things about figure-ground understanding is that very often we have to have a certain orientation in order to get it. If we don't understand something, it could be because it's not oriented correctly. So if we look at the image on the left, basically we see black and white value patterning. It creates kind of a texture. There's a larger kind of shape area here, and then we see kind of a modeling going on, and there's a few darker shapes, and maybe we can see this is a nose, this is a mouth, and there's eyes here and things like that. But that's not what it really is. This is upside down. Here, if we roll it over, what we are looking at is a Dalmatian who's sniffing the ground that is basically got some light shadow on it because there's trees around. So this is a very high contrast photograph. This was actually taken, this is a dog, and on the lawn, but there's shadows cast by leaves on a tree, and so the dog just absolutely, the figure absolutely merges with the background by virtue of visual texture, visual patterning, light-dark patterning. And some people, it takes them a long time to even see the dog in the right side up piece, but we totally lose it here. Natural camouflage is a figure ground ambiguity. The ability to blend into the background creates security and safety in a lot of situations. And we find that naturally, and we also find it where people need to be protected. And this actually was a photograph that somebody sent to me, and it takes some people a little while to see the Marine kind of sacked out there on the sofa, because the camis, the camouflage uniform that he's wearing is the same color and very similar to the pattern of the couch. So you have to look very carefully to see the Kevlar helmet and kind of the neck and chin. Here's the shoulder, here's the pocket, here's the rear end, and here's the boots. And he's napping unobtrusively on the sofa. So the final analysis, which by the way means that the lecture's about to end. Yay! What do you see? In the Yakov Agam, what do you see? What kind of shape relationships? Is there a sense of transparency? Is there a sense of overlapping or division? Do you see implied line going through, by the way? Do you see any figure ground or positive negative shape in here? No. Here, do you see figure ground and positive negative? Look at the peacock. The shape of the peacock is actually negative space. And here in the S form is negative space. Here, very familiar logo, and much beloved if you are of this technological persuasion. We have the apple. The leaf is detached from the apple form itself, so there's a detachment there, but somebody took a bite out of it, so we have subtraction. Obviously figure ground. Here we will read the S as figure against the U and the A as ground, but we see the whole thing as a figure against the ground. This is a negative shape. This is actually negative space because it merges with the surround. And this is negative space. The peacock body that comes up here is negative space. We will interpret it and give it meaning as a shape. One more. What do you see here? And if you look at this, this is actually a photograph of a kind of a jumble of chairs in a room. And what's emphasized here, what's received the color treatment, is the negative shapes.